Okay, what do we got? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Are we all in? Almost. We're almost in. It really is an honor to be here with such a distinguished array of presenters who have so much to do about making our elections fairer. To be here with Mr. Hoyer, Mr. Lujan, Congresswoman Lofgren, whom I'll reference, John Sarbanes, who's been our hero in terms of H.R. 1, Rep. Pappas, a freshman who had, as part of their whole thrust in the campaign, Cleaner Government H.R. 1. Also, Mr. O'Halloran of Arizona is with us as well, champion on this issue in the Congress. You'll be hearing from Vanita Gupta, Tiffany Muller, and it is again, a collection of folks who have been very much for the people in protecting our democracy. I thank John Sarbanes, chair of our Democracy Reform Task Force, and the lead sponsor, where'd he go? The lead sponsor of H.R. 1. We're pleased to be with Chair Zoe Lofgren, our brilliant legal mind in the caucus. She is the chair of the House Administration Committee, had jurisdiction over this legislation. Also, as I mentioned, our members of our leadership, Mr. Hoyer and Mr. Lujan, whom you'll be hearing from. Rep. Chris Pappas represents our freshman class. They made cleaning up government the #1 priority from day one. Again, Tiffany has been our heroine in all of this, and Vanita, thank you for your leadership. Now, here we are. 10 years ago, the Supreme Court of the United States opened the floodgates to big, dark, special interest money in our politics. And a crushing decision in Citizens United undermined a fundamental American value. We are a government of the many, not a government of the money. Democrats know that when we break the grip of the special interest, we can advance progress for the people. That is why in the first bills we passed H.R. 1 for the people, ending the dominance of big, dark, special interest money in politics and empowering small donors, ensuring clean, fair elections and fighting voter suppression, as, again, cleaning up government. Yet for more than 300 days, the Grim Reaper has refused to give us a vote. In fact, Mitch McConnell has said the problem is not there is too much money in politics. Mitch McConnell has said the problem is there is not enough money in politics. Shocking. And we have a message for him. Americans want a government that works for the public interest, not for the special interest. And they will join us to turn up the heat until H.R. 1, House Resolution 1, is too hot to handle, and Senator McConnell is forced to take it up. It is, again, something that gives people hope, that tries to diminish their doubts about if their voice counts as compared and contrasted with big, dark money. It gives them confidence that, yes, we can lower the cost of prescription drugs. We can reduce the power of big gun money in Congress and get safe legislation for a safer America. We can protect our environment without big, dark money, keeping leaders in our country in denial over climate. The list goes on. And I thank Mr. Sarbanes again for his tremendous leadership and showing people the connection to their aspirations and reducing the role of dark money. With that, I'm very pleased to yield the floor to a distinguished leader for many years on this subject, Mr. Hoyer of Maryland, our distinguished House Democratic leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. 10 years. What's happened in those 10 years? I am so pleased to join my colleague from Maryland, John Sarbanes, who's been such a leader on this issue. Thank you very much. His father and I were very, very close, and I've become very close to his son, and his son has demonstrated the same kind of integrity and focus on good government that his father did. So thank you for your leadership. Ben Ray Lujan, the Assistant Speaker, thank you for your galvanizing certainly the freshman class on this issue. And Chris Pappas, thank you very much for being a representative of that freshman class, and Tom O'Halloran, who has been very much involved in that, and then of course our leader on the Judiciary Committee, Zoe Lofgren. What's happened in those 10 years? Ms. Mueller, who is leading the effort so well, Tiffany just told me we were spending about $780 million on outside spending before Citizens United. Now $4.4 billion. That's a 400% increase. 80% prior to Citizens United was disclosed spending. My mother used to say to me, consider the source. You know, who's talking? I said, Mom, you know, somebody said something. Consider the source. If it's secret, if it's dark, if it's not disclosed, you can't consider the source. You do not know who's talking to you or supporting others. Now, 50%. A major reduction in the knowledge voters have. That's not what our democracy is about. Our democracy is about citizens having information on which they can base sound judgments. Consider the source. That's what this is about. One of the first major bills, as you've heard, was H.R. 1. It dealt not only with campaign finance reform, it dealt with voting rights, it dealt with redistricting, it dealt with making our democracy work better for the people. That bill would undo the worst effects of the Citizens United ruling. That ruling allowed billions of dollars in dark and undisclosed money to infiltrate our politics and drown out the voices of the voters, of the people. We are committed to ending Citizens United, which is why we passed H.R. 1. I was proud to be hosted by End Citizens United in late 2018 with Tiffany. What eventually became H.R. 1, with the help of leaders like Representative Sarbanes, Chairwoman Lofgren, and others. And we spoke at that point in time, John and I both spoke, about how we needed to reform our politics. To do that, we must end the wrong-headed, not based upon facts or what the expectations could have been. We knew what was going to happen when Citizens United passed. We knew that dark, undisclosed money would infiltrate at large levels our politics and obfuscate rather than illuminate the politics for the American citizens. H.R. 1 will do that. And it's a shame that Senator McConnell and Senate Republicans are blocking it, as well as blocking so many other pieces of legislation which would make our country more open, more transparent, more democratic, and yes, more safe. I urge Senator McConnell to allow votes on H.R. 1. I don't know whether we'll have 51 or 60 votes to pass it, but in a democracy, if you don't have a vote, you'll never know. So I would urge them to act on this legislation and so many other pieces of legislation which will make America more open, more democratic, more free, more responsive to its citizens. And now I yield to the Assistant Speaker from New Mexico, who has done such an extraordinary job, as I say, of working with our freshmen as the DCCC chair, working through the political process to illuminate, not obfuscate, the consequences of the failure to repeal Citizens United. Ben Ray Lujan.
Well, Stanley, thank you so very much, and I want to thank our Majority Leader for the work that he does day in and day out, not just in the halls of Washington, but all across America. Stanley takes time to travel the country to hear directly from constituents, from hardworking families, about the importance of putting them first, of making sure that we have initiatives like overturning Citizens United that will truly bring about the change that the country is hungry for. I also want to thank the leadership from End Citizens United. We'll hear from Tiffany a bit later. It's been a cornerstone of the conversation. John Sarbanes has been that conscience in the U.S. House of Representatives, grounding this debate. The Citizens United decision is one of the most corrosive Supreme Court cases this country has seen in modern times. A decision that corrupted the system, that eroded Americans' trust in their government. That, for some, placed the value of money ahead of the value of doing what's right. You wonder why some votes come down to the U.S. House floor. When Republicans were in the majority at the beginning of one of our recent sessions, there was a vote that was brought to the floor that hurt workers, put them in more dangerous places. Many of you know that my father, almost a decade ago, passed away from a bout with stage 4 lung cancer. He wasn't a smoker. Dad got sick because of exposure on the job. He was a welder. One of these bills that came to the floor made it easier for workers to get sick with beryllium exposure. Why in the earth, why in God's name would anyone allow that to happen? It's the undue influence of those special interests that put their corporate profits and lining their pockets ahead of the health of the American people. That's why overturning Citizens United matters so very much. Breaking the grip dark money has on our politics is one of the most transformative changes we can bring to our government. If we don't get this right, it's going to stop real reform, real progress from occurring. And that's why I'm so proud to be here standing with my colleagues. These are champions who have spent the past 10 years breaking down the Citizens United decision and galvanizing support all across America. Democrats, Republicans, independents, people that have voted for the first time. This is the reason they're getting engaged. So I want to thank them for that. There's much work to do in front of us, but we need the American people to continue to be vocal. With that, I'm going to turn this over to one of my colleagues, one of our friends, one of the most thoughtful members of the U.S. House of Representatives, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren.
Thanks, Ben Ray. You know, it's, as been mentioned, it's been 10 years since the Supreme Court wrongly overturned decades of established precedent and gutted the nation's campaign finance laws. Now, as has been mentioned, that decision paved the way for an avalanche of dark money into our political system. The vast coffers opened up to saturate the airwaves with a one-sided political agenda. That tsunami of money had the effect of drowning out the voices of regular Americans, our neighbors, ordinary people who wish to have their views heard. And it's no coincidence that by the time the Democrats took control of the House, trust in government had reached an all-time low. H.R. 1 is a way to fight back. The mechanics of our democracy, access to voting, holding government accountable, have all undergone radical changes, and H.R. 1 seeks to fix those changes. I was proud to move H.R. 1 through the House Administration Committee because it helps put power back in the hands of regular American people, especially by curbing the dominance of dark money in American politics. We need to level the playing field so regular people are back in control of their government. And this isn't just because we're for good government. When you think about the things that people are upset about, the price of prescription drugs, the inaction on gun safety, think about the role that dark money has played in keeping sensible solutions from the American people. So we did what we said we would do. We passed H.R. 1, and unfortunately, the majority leader, Mr. McConnell, has sat on that bill. We're hoping that starting today, we will put new emphasis on his need to get moving on this bill. The American people need it, our democracy needs it, and he owes it to the American people. A lot of people worked on this bill. Certainly our freshman class made this one of the most important items as they ran for election the first time. Our speaker and our majority leader and our whip and the other leadership made it a priority. But a person who has made this almost a life's work, who has worked tirelessly for this, also deserves credit, and that's the next speaker, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. John Sarbanes.
Thank you very much, Joe. I want to thank Joe for leading H.R. 1 through the House Administrative Committee. She did a brilliant job of that, and she continues to emphasize the importance of pushing back against the influence of big money. I have to salute Speaker Pelosi as well, because it was the Citizens United decision that was the occasion for her to begin pulling together a group in the House of Representatives to focus on how we could address the undue influence of big money in politics. And she created a task force almost 10 years ago to begin doing that. That's now the Democracy Reform Task Force. It was the locus of our efforts to assemble all of these terrific ideas that came forward from our colleagues, but really we're translating what the public wanted to see in terms of getting its voice back. So I have to salute the Speaker for having the prescience to do that in the wake of Citizens United decision, but also leaning on that to this very day in her support of H.R. 1, along with Congressman Hoyer. I want to thank Ben Ray Lujan for the efforts he made to work with the incoming class of freshmen to make this a priority. This is a very sober anniversary, there's no question. 10 years since the Citizens United case was handed down by the Supreme Court. It's where it all began, and I don't mean by that where money in politics and its influence began, but it's where this arrogance began on the part of super PACs and the super wealthy, armed with this idea somehow that corporations are people, that money is speech. They decided they were going to take over American politics. And when they did that, what it created was a deep sense of powerlessness in the country on the part of everyday Americans who looked at Washington, looked at politics, and looked at government and felt like our voice doesn't matter anymore. It's the money people that call the shots. And it all began with this case of Citizens United. Well, through H.R. 1, which was a transformative anti-corruption and clean elections package of reforms, we pushed back against the Citizens United case and other efforts to curb the voice of everyday Americans in our democracy. We put it on the floor in the first 100 days, as was promised. We passed it, and then we sent it to the graveyard, to Mitch McConnell, who continues to stand with his arms folded on the Senate side, saying to the American people who want to see these changes, you shall not pass. But we're going to keep up the pressure on Mitch McConnell to do the right thing on behalf of the American people. In many ways, he's the chief architect of the influence that money has in our politics. If you look back over his decades career, he's been promoting the influence of the insiders and the big money crowd, and now what we call the super PAC. So it's a tough fight against McConnell, but it's a fight that we're ready to have. And we've done this with the support of many, many groups. I'm so pleased you're going to be hearing from Vanita Gupta today and from Tiffany Muller, who've been core leaders in this effort to fight back on the influence of money and lift up people in our democracy. But we could not have done this. We could not have done H.R. 1. And we would be unable to continue to translate the voices of people out in the country who feel left out and locked out without the efforts of our freshman class. These were people who ran last year, listened carefully, understood that the public wanted to see change in Washington, that they wanted to solve their anger not by sort of grabbing for a slogan like President Trump offered, but grabbing for real solutions in the form of legislation that could be put on the floor in the first 100 days. And the freshman class was the tip of the spear. They were the ones that made this happen. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Chris Pappas from New Hampshire, who is one of the leaders in that effort. Chris.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Sarbanes, for all of your efforts, and to all the other leaders and colleagues and advocates who join us here today, who have for a number of years been focused on the corrosive influence of big money in our political system and how we can ensure that we're putting the power in the hands of the American people. I couldn't be more proud to be here today as a representative of the freshman class, a historic group of individuals who represent the most diverse and dynamic new class of members of Congress in our nation's history. We arrived here with clear marching orders from the constituents in our district that we need to fundamentally change how Washington works and fix a deeply broken system. It's been 10 years since the Citizens United decision was handed down by the Supreme Court. That has fundamentally altered the landscape of our political system, and it has had dire and far-reaching consequences. It's tilted the playing field even more in favor of big money, of the special interest and big corporations that have outsized influence here in Washington, D.C. The new members of Congress came to Washington to become change agents, not to become part of a broken system. And we're not giving up. We're not deterred even when there are political obstacles that are put in our way. Because if we're going to be able to effectively make progress for folks back home, to make sure that we're living up to the responsibility that we assumed when we took office, we've got to stop the corrosive influence that big money has over our politics and the policies that we see being debated here in Washington, D.C. About a year ago, we helped provide the momentum to pass H.R. 1 through the House, which is the most sweeping democracy reform package taken up since Watergate, and it can help us mitigate the damage that Citizens United has brought upon us. We are proud to pass this bill that's going to limit the power of big money, make it easier, not harder to vote, and ensure that we have tough new ethics reforms. We continue to call on Mitch McConnell to stop blocking this legislation, to stop blocking the will of the American people, and help us restore the ability of everyday Americans to have equal standing in their government again. This is urgent, and it's foundational, because so many crucial priorities have been waylaid by powerful special interests. So whether it is the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs, gun violence legislation, or our ability to combat climate change head-on, we need to get this right first in order to fundamentally make progress. H.R. 1 gives us that opportunity. You know, I'm reminded often of a quote from a campaign finance reform advocate from my state of New Hampshire. Her name is Granny D. And she said, democracy is not something we have, it's something we do. And it is not a system that's built for bystanders. We all have to be in the arena fighting. And I think that's the energy and advocacy that is represented, not just in the freshman class, but across the Democratic caucus. We need to continue to insist that this democracy is truly of, by, and for the people, that it works for everyone, and we're going to continue fighting ahead. So I really want to thank you all for being here and introduce Vanita Gupta, who's a great advocate, for some additional comments. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Vanita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, a coalition of more than 220 national organizations working towards an America as good as its ideals. We have been deeply appreciative for the leadership of Speaker Pelosi and for Congressman Sarbanes, who led us through the H.R. 1 fight. But as you said, with the freshman Democrats representing the most diverse Congress in our nation's history, really being an engine to bring home the degree to which our system has been corrupted and needs to be unrigged for the American people. Today marks 10 years since the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United and fundamentally altered the landscape of American democracy, allowing unlimited dark money to flood our elections, determine our candidates, and silence our voices. The decisions had devastating consequences for the integrity of our politics, and clearly that was no accident. Citizens United was part of a larger constellation of efforts by conservatives to rig our system against the American people, particularly people of color and other vulnerable communities. Now we have reached a crisis point of corruption. We have Trump and the Senate Republicans that are stacking the federal courts with people who have worked to undermine our civil rights. Far too many states are making it far too hard to exercise the franchise to vote. And by his own admission, the president's been trying to extort a foreign government to boost his re-election campaign. Let me be clear, when our democracy is in peril, so too are our civil rights. And democracy is foundational to America's highest values. When people are blocked from civic participation, our hard-won progress becomes vulnerable. That is exactly what's happening today. Unequal access to the levers of our democracy are causing staggering setbacks for civil and human rights, from affordable health care to fair wages to educational equity to justice reform. And similarly, without government accountability and transparency, people are losing the power to ensure that lawmakers represent their interests. The ability to participate in our democracy has long been a racial justice issue. It's a civil rights issue, and we are overdue for change. That is why the Leadership Conference works so hard to help enact the passage of H.R. 1. It is why we are calling on the Senate and Senator McConnell to pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and usher in a transformative vision for American democracy that it represents. We're grateful to House Democratic leadership, to Congressman Sarbanes, to the House freshman class for making democracy reform the first order of business in the new Congress, and for taking bold steps to fix what is broken and put the government back in the hands of the people. And now the Senate must act. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to introduce Tiffany Muller of End Citizens United, so there's nobody better placed to talk about this topic. That's an organization that found this anxiety out in the public and decided to channel it in a way that could advocate for change, and has been a tremendous help to the Speaker and all of us here in the House in getting this legislation of H.R. 1 front and center, and continues to make the fight. So, Tiffany.
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, not to be confused with Citizens United, which actually happens quite often. So my name is Tiffany Muller, and I'm the president of In Citizens United Action Fund. And as we have discussed here today, we are at the 10th anniversary of the Citizens United decision, which took these two really terrible ideas and it merged them together. It said corporations are people, money equals speech, and it took an already broken system and it put it on steroids, and it put a for sale sign on our democracy. There is no question Citizens United was disastrous for our country. 10 years later, we've seen the devastating impact it's had on our democracy. The court's naive view of our electoral process set the stage for billions of dollars corrupting our politics. Prior to the Citizens United decision, as you heard Leader Hoyer say, there was $750 million of outside spending. Since the Citizens United decision, there's been $4.4 billion of outside spending. And despite the court naively assuming that disclosure and transparency would handle the issues that come from that amount of money, what we've seen is actually a decrease in disclosure and transparency on the spending in our elections. 80% of spending was fully disclosed prior to Citizens United. We now have 50% of spending that has little or no disclosure at all. And it only took 11 mega donors to hit $1 billion to super PACs. 11 people. And in the 10 years prior to Citizens United, in only 15 races did outside spending actually outspend candidates in races across the country. Since that time, we've had 126 races where outside spending has eclipsed candidate spending. So no longer are candidates actually controlling the narrative. They're no longer talking about their priorities or who they are or what they believe. Instead, it's these outside forces that we don't even know where the money's coming from, who are throwing negative ads at voters and perpetuating misconceptions and downright falsehoods. This has led to a system that's broken and works for special interests more than everyday Americans. Blocking progress on climate change while the energy sector gives $700 million in campaign contributions. Blocking progress on gun safety while the NRA spends $56 million in the 2016 election alone. And of course, blocking progress on drug prices while pharma puts 1,400 lobbyists on Capitol Hill every single day. So our organization was founded 5 years ago to fight back, and what we found was that people across the country are so tired of this system. We have 4 million members across the country who've said enough is enough and are fighting to fix the rigged system. And 2019 was quite a year for that fight. Thanks to the leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Leader Hoyer, the entire House Democratic Caucus, of course Congressman Sarbanes, the freshman class, and the amazing work of partners like Vanita Gupta and the Declaration for American Democracy, the House passed the largest, most transformational anti-corruption bill that we've seen since Watergate. The For the People Act is truly a once-in-a-generation reform bill that will help root out corruption in the dominance of big money special interests and give the American people their voices back. It will restore the promise of our democracy. But Senator McConnell, as we have heard, is blocking all progress on that. And why? Well, he's the chief beneficiary of this broken system. He gave billionaires and special interests a tax break so they could write more big checks to his super PAC. He blocks action on climate change, gun safety, and drug prices because the lobbyists and special interests line his pockets for doing so. Americans deserve better. They demand better. They deserve a democracy that's open, accountable, and reflective of our communities, and we will keep fighting to overturn Citizens United through the courts or through a constitutional amendment. But we can make so much of a difference today and undo so much of the damage caused by Citizens United by passing H.R. 1. The House has done its job, and now we demand that Senator McConnell and the Senate do theirs.
Thanks, Tiffany, and I just want to emphasize that last point. People out in the country are so beaten down by the influence that money has that they look at Washington sometimes and they sort of say, they're all the same. It doesn't work for us. It's all corrupt. And what Democrats were trying to show with H.R. 1 is we are listening. We are trying to make a difference. We are trying to fix this and empower you. And we feel so strongly about it, we're going to make it our first priority. And we're going to put it on the floor in the first 100 days, and we're going to pass it. So don't think that it's all of Washington that's the problem in terms of responding to the Citizens United case. The problem is Mitch McConnell on the Senate side. We followed through on the promise we made to the public that if we got the gavel, we would make real change and fight against money. We need McConnell to do the same thing so that the public understands that Washington is listening to them. So again, thank you all for coming. Are there any questions? Yes.
Michael Bloomberg told us in Texas over the weekend that he would commit up to $1 billion of his money, even if he's not in the presidential campaign, so the party is whatever. Is $1 billion contribution, is it only corrosive when it's the other side? What if he said $5 billion, $10 billion?
Look, the big money finds everybody in our system right now. It finds Democrats, it finds Republicans, it finds independents. The question is, which is the party that's actually standing up and trying to change the system? There are no Republicans here. There were no Republicans on H.R. 1. Not a single one. Not because H.R. 1 was a partisan bill. Everything in there is supported at 75, 80, 85% by the American people. You can't get to those numbers if only Democrats support it. You need independents. You need Republicans. So it's not a partisan bill when you look out in the country. People want this change. It was made partisan by the decree of McConnell and the other leadership in the House that said to their Republican colleagues, don't you get on that bill. So sure, money's everywhere. Everybody gets tangled up in this money. That's the problem right now with our democracy. The question is, who's going to solve this thing? Who's reaching for a better place? Democrats are doing that. And we're going to keep fighting. And that it's going to be a leap to get to that new system. And that could be a scary world for a lot of people who've gotten used to the status quo. But the only way you're going to restore the trust and the faith of a cynical public out there is if you make that change. And that's what we stand for here. That's what Speaker Pelosi stands for, and that's what H.R. 1 is all about. I think in a new system like that, the Michael Bloombergs, anybody who's running, who's got a lot of money, it comes out in the wash. It will be balanced by the empowerment that comes. One of the components of H.R. 1 is a small donor matching system to fund congressional campaigns so that members of Congress don't have to go hat in hand to lobbyists and big money and PACs anymore. They can reach out to small donors. They can earn matching funds. And here's the part I love the best. Those matching funds come from a surcharge on corporate lawbreakers. So the people that have been breaking our democracy with their influence are going to be the ones to pay to fix the democracy. So the answer is in empowering everyday Americans out there. So they feel like in any forum that comes to politics, they can compete with the big money and that their voice can be heard. Any other questions? Any other thoughts, comments here? Okay, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks.